Then Saturday night at 8 p.m., we'll bring you the day's events, plus at 9, live coverage of another White House dinner for the NATO leaders, the heads of NATO partner countries, cabinet officials, and members of Congress, here on C-SPAN. Now we'll look at Serbian news coverage of Day 29 of NATO airstrikes on Yugoslavia from government-controlled Radio Television Serbia in Belgrade. This portion of the news was recorded today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time and translated here at C-SPAN in Washington, D.C. It's 40 minutes.
You're watching primetime news of Radio Television Serbia. Good evening. The federal government of Yugoslavia, presided over by Momir Bulatovic, passed a decision today on the concrete measures regarding the financing of the armed forces of Yugoslavia within the framework of its monetary politics. The federal government concluded that despite the NATO aggression on our country, economic activities are in accordance with the plans and programs. They also passed measures on comprehensive activation of all economic resources of the country. The federal government passed along the collection of all data about the crimes against humanity and the violations of international law that have been conducted by NATO during this aggression on Yugoslavia. The federal government appointed a committee tasked to gather the data on crimes against humanity and international law, to prepare legal documents for bringing charges against the war criminals and the war crimes during the aggression on our country, an aggression completely against all norms of international law. The evil alliance of NATO targeted today the bridge near Ostružnica and a number of village houses in Jakovo. Last night, they targeted again civilian and economic facilities throughout the country, bridges, TV towers, but the anti-aircraft units responded effectively, preventing the bombing on several locations. This morning around 3:15, the NATO criminals hit the business center Ušće in Novi Beograd. This is a civilian facility with more than 20 companies in it, many private TV and radio stations, as well as the headquarters of the Socialist Party of Serbia. The firefighters immediately responded and localized the fire. The explosion was felt by surrounding buildings, breaking windows, and many apartments were hit by shrapnels. The building of the business center targeted by NATO housed, among other facilities, the TV station Pink, TV station S, TV station Košava, and TV station SOS. This morning around 3 o'clock, the aggressor planes with more than 50 missiles hit a refugee camp Maya close to Đakovica. According to the available information, at least 5 people died and more than 30 have been severely wounded. One apartment building was completely destroyed and several other houses were very damaged. In this area, for more than 30 years, we have had many Serbs from Croatia that were themselves refugees. Last night's attack of the criminal alliance on Ivalia, a neighborhood close to Pristina, inhabited by more than 10,000 Serbs and Albanians, clearly shows that aside from economic, infrastructural and other facilities, NATO targets densely populated areas. The NATO missiles hit the yard of the Gashi family, inflicting a lot of material damage. The tragedy was averted because of the partial explosion of the missile. According to experts, this is a very destructive explosives intended for killing people. You can see for yourself, this is the house. Everything has cracked on it. This is from the missile from these NATO people. A sane person could never do this. You can see for yourself. These are criminals. NATO says that it targets only military targets. But there is nothing military here. Where they hit, you can see for yourself. There is nothing military in the area. Only a neighborhood, farmers from Ivalia, as you know. The criminals of NATO alliance obviously do not favor the peace and common life of Serbs, Albanians and other ethnic groups in Kosovo. This is confirmed by the example of Ivalia, where despite the daily killing, the Albanians have not left their homes. They are determined to live and share the fate of their Serbian neighbors. The Serbian Commissioner for Refugees, Bratislava Morina, stated on the occasion of the latest criminal attack of NATO near Đakovica that what the Croat forces missed in August of 1995 by targeting a column of Serbian civilians fleeing to Serbia was finished off by these neo-Nazi of the NATO alliance. The Serbs who tried to find a refuge in this small town of Kosovo could not even dream that this night would be the end of their life for many of them. Will Mrs. Sadako Ogata, the High Commissioner for Refugees at the UN, finally respond to this tragedy and demand protection for people that she is charged to protect? We hope she will, says our Serbian Commissioner for Refugees, Bratislava Morina. The criminals of the NATO alliance continued pursuing their evil goals last night. Sometime around 2:20, they hit the Bešćani Bridge, one of the longest bridges on the international road E75 that connects Srem and Bačka, Eastern and Western Europe. These mad criminals for third time have hit it. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the criminal alliance hit with 2 missiles the railroad bridge in Ostrožnica near Obrenovac. This bridge is no longer usable at the moment. Fortunately, there was no any traffic. Novi Sad and its neighboring area has lived through one more of these brutal attacks. The aggressor alliance attacked another bridge, the railroad bridge. Several powerful missiles hit the center of this vital infrastructural facility on Danube that links Novi Sad and Petrovaradin. Last night's attack of the NATO killers did not finish with this. Somewhat later, there were several explosions from Fruška Gora. Macedonia is a huge minefield for exercise, is written by the analysts in the largest pro-government dailies. Between 140 and 150,000 of pieces of small arms have been illegally entered from Albania. Members of the Albanian terrorist organizations walk down the streets, in the mountains, in the hills, states the press. All of this is monitored, helped, armed and controlled by the great masters of the New World Order. The discovery of the arms cache in Macedonia was not an overzealous police action, but a struggle to prevent Macedonia from becoming a jungle of armed primitives, states Nova Macedonia, the main daily. 2 French soldiers from the NATO mission in Macedonia were wounded when the villages of Kučevište, 15 kilometers north of Skopje, threw rocks on a convoy of military vehicles passing through the village. This is reported by France Press. The locals attacked with rocks 3 military vehicles, forcing the occupants of one jeep to flee, trying to save their lives, stated the spokesman of the criminal NATO alliance in Macedonia. The jeep was thereupon set on fire, as confirmed by the French forces in Macedonia. Prompted by the criminal attack of NATO last night on the building of the business center at Ušće, the spokesman of the Yugoslav Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nebojša Vujović, and Goran Matić, the federal minister, spoke to journalists. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at a very well-attended conference for foreign and domestic journalists, Nebojša Vujović, the spokesperson, spoke that by bombing this business center, NATO aggressors committed another grave violation, an offense against humanity. Mr. Vujović stressed that the business center was not only a symbol of our capital city, but of modern Europe. It housed 3 private TV stations, 2 radio stations, and more than 100 companies. He added that just as many other destroyed facilities, this center had no military significance. The spokesman of our Foreign Affairs Ministry reminded the journalists of the tragic results of the bombing campaign and murder of the last few days. He stressed that the bombing of the Executive Council building in Novi Sad, an architectural landmark, was a bombing against the unity of all ethnic groups in that part of Serbia. The tragic list of NATO successes should be augmented by the bombing of the refugee convoy, of passenger trains, the destruction of houses in Aleksinac, Ćuprija, Kragujevac, and the murder of a 3-year-old girl in Batajnica. Vujović spoke about the readiness of the people to continue the political resolution of this problem. This is shown by the meetings between Serbian officials and Dr. Dr. Ibrahim Rugova. The only solution for the crisis in Kosovo is to continue a direct dialogue between representatives of the state and all ethnic communities. We are trying to speed up the political dialogue, and we accept all constructive suggestions, but first and foremost we have to stop this aggression. In response to one of the many questions, the spokesperson stressed that NATO, by bombing TV towers, private and state-owned TV stations, wants above all to conceal the truth about its crimes and create a ground for the propaganda machine of the West. Today, the spokespeople of NATO are so happy because they have hit another civilian target. This was said by the Federal Minister of Goran Matić during his meeting with the press. In the building of the business center Ušće, there are many radio and TV stations. There were altogether 8 media housed here, 4 TV, 4 radio stations. These stations were not about politics. Their topics were sport, music, art, culture, and other areas like that. It's interesting that 80% of the Pink television program was American films from Hollywood. The greatest part of the program of TV Kosovo also came from the U.S., especially music. The destruction of NATO is not accidental, just as the convoy of refugees, the train, and the town of Aleksinac were not accidents. All of these examples show that there is a systemic attack on civilian targets. They can destroy a lot more buildings, they can take a lot more lives from us, but they cannot destroy our morale and our freedom. What's reality in Yugoslavia today can be reality in any other country tomorrow, said Goran Matić. The freedom that we have is dangerous for NATO, and that's why they try by all means to destroy it. But we are not afraid, and we shall defend this freedom because it's a symbol of our existence, stated Goran Matić. The ill-fated Minister of Foreign Affairs of Britain, Robin Cook, added one more lie to the long series of his misstatements and stupidities. In the Parliament, he said, and remained alive, though he said so, that the NATO action has been called for by the Kosovo Albanians. He only didn't say which Albanians. The Albanians from Kosovo are saying the following about the aggression. I would want the whole world to be with us, to respect us, not to bombard us, because this is a huge damage for our Yugoslavia and for the Albanians and for the Serbs. I'm for peace, to stop the NATO bombing, to look at people, to take care of them with food, with medicine, and with doctors, so we can go back to our homes, to stop with the NATO pact. The bombs of the NATO alliance, they hit us during the middle of the night. They don't know where we are, where is the army, where is the police, so we are afraid. This happened near Čakovica. I would like this to be resolved in a peaceful way, not with bombing. Not with bombing. I'm not for it. And majority of my people, my relatives, my brothers are not for bombing. What is bombing gonna gain? For whom? For whom? For nobody. They should stop throwing the bombs. Dr. Ibrahim Rugova for several times have spoken about stopping the bombing and the aggression. That's why we wonder, who are those Albanians that were asking for bombardment? Simply the terrorist Hashim Tači. He's the only one left. However, he's been in Albania for a while. And maybe from Cook and other politicians like him, he can ask them to only go to Albania. Or Cook can take Tači to the London pub Koha, where, according to the British press, he meets the Albanian terrorists. Just as the saying, misery loves company, it's obvious that Cook and Tači rejoice in each other's company. Everybody looks for each other's company. So the terrorist Tači is looking for Cook and vice versa. As far as the Albanians from Kosovo, with their daily mass returns to their homes, they show that they have understood that they were simply a bargaining chip for Cook, Blair, Clinton, and the whole gang. And how much they really think about Albanians was also shown by the Minister of Internal Affairs of Britain, who yesterday solemnly announced that Britain would be generous to accept, believe it or not, 120 Albanian refugees. Given that it comes from the the generous British, it's a lot. As to the return of the Albanians to their homes in Kosovo, this is attested to by this just received report. The people are for peace. We want to go back to our homes. We are north of Podujevo. Close to us are the villages of Šajkovac, Mirovac, and behind us Gure and Baklava. For several days, we have been seeing these kinds of scenes. Albanians are returning en masse to their homes. According to the local authorities, the villages of Podujevo County have seen more than 50,000 returns. After almost 4 weeks of hiding themselves from the missiles of the NATO, they are seeking the warmth of their homes, and they understood the bitterness of the illusion that they have been poisoned by for a decade by their separatist leadership and their Western mentors. How do you comment this bombing? No comment. It's not good. This is horrible for the whole world. NATO is aggressor. This is risky for everyone. In Podujevo, these past few days, there has been a lot of humanitarian assistance, and the delivery of all of the necessities is taking place in all of the villages where the Albanians are returning. The Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs, Živadin Jovanović, received today a delegation of the Bulgarian Assembly composed of representatives of many parliamentary groups. The Bulgarian delegates condemned the NATO aggression against Yugoslavia, stating that it's a grave danger for the peace and stability in the Balkans. And they conveyed the solidarity of the Bulgarian people with the people of Yugoslavia, who are showing courage and bravery, and thus exemplify dignity and constancy. The Minister Jovanović commended the Bulgarian delegates and the Bulgarian people for their expressed support and solidarity. He said that the future and progress of all of the people of Southeastern Europe can be built only by good neighborly relations, mutual respect, and further development of the mutual confidence. He stressed that friends are really shown, true friends are shown in times of difficulty, and the speculations with Balkan peoples by NATO cannot bring anything good to any country or any people of this part of Europe. There is no certain future stability if it depends on the NATO forces, because they bring divisions and distrust for their egotistical interests. The future and the equal treatment of the Balkans in Europe depends on the mutual cooperation and more comprehensive use of all of the regional resources, stated Minister Jovanović. The delegation of the Federal Assembly, headed by the President of the Citizens' Council for Foreign Affairs, Ljubiša Ristić, received in Belgrade a delegation of the People's Assembly of Bulgaria. Both delegations pledged to oppose those who want to pursue their interests by enslaving other people and to create a Balkan that will belong to all the Balkan people. The President of the Citizens' Council, Ljubiša Ristić, noted that the goal of the US is to control Europe and create in the Balkans a gigantic military base. Mr. Karakashanov, head of the Bulgarian delegation, reiterated the position of Bulgaria against the aggression on Yugoslavia, that all problems should be solved by political means, that the only chance of the Balkan people is to join together against this new world order. The President of the Executive Council of Kosovo, Zoran Anđelković, held a meeting with the local civil defense authorities in Kosovo. It was stated that despite the daily bombardment of our country by NATO, the supply of the citizens in Kosovo with daily needs is satisfactory. Maximal efforts are made to plant as much land during this spring season and to provide fuel, seeds, fertilizers and equipment. It was also stressed that due to the selfless work of the employees, many other services in the province are functioning well. In the distant 1970s, a British historian, Robert Lanfan, wrote a book, Serbs, Guardians of the Gate, and he stressed that the Serbs have universal patriotism, physical prowess, and a determination. Especially the Serbian farmer has a determination. Now we can see how our farmers confirm once again the words of Lanfan. through this report. The spring planting season in Serbia goes according to the plans. The goal is to farm every acre to secure food for the country and all necessary reserves. The government measures have been timely. Many cultures, including wheat and corn, have been planted fully. What's essential to stress here is that many cultures have been planted on surfaces that are much larger than the surfaces that were farmed last year. This applies to corn, sunflower, and other cultures, despite the aggression of NATO against our country. Our farmers, every day and every night, work on their homesteads, and thus, by maximum of effort, they try to simply meet the programs of the Republic. The shareholder society in Stara Pazova finished the planting on almost 40 acres per day, and all of the necessary equipment have been secured. We hope that with our work and with our selflessness, we contributed to the defense of the country, and we believe that our task has been successfully accomplished. I am especially pleased to hear how these things are going, and I think that we shall manage in peace to give to people everything that they need. How is the situation with wheat? I think we gave all the necessary fertilizer, so I think it's in good condition. How is the sowing going? How much per day? Approximately 40 acres per day. This is wartime, are you afraid? No. So everything goes in normal manner, as if it were just regular time. The farmers have had very favorable weather, and we expect everything to be finished by second half of May. Today, the Constitutional Court of Yugoslavia passed the following decision. They held a session and made a decision that eliminates 8 provisions pertaining to work obligations that were adopted by the government of Montenegro on March 26. This decision, therefore, invalidates all penalties for citizens of Montenegro made in accordance with those provisions. At the same time, the Constitutional Court of Yugoslavia, at the proposal of the Federal Prosecutor and the Supreme Military Court, began proceedings to determine the constitutionality of the 8 provisions of Montenegro. Today's decision of the Constitutional Court of Yugoslavia is simply invalidating these decisions in order to simply prevent further negative consequences for the defense of the country. In the explanation, the Judge Markicevic stated that only 2 days after the beginning of the NATO aggression, the government of Montenegro passed provisions that would have punished all persons employed in the area of defense if they answered calls for mobilization. These provisions affected the defense capacities of our country, since a number of people failed to respond to the call for military duty, arguing this on the basis of these provisions regarding so-called work obligations. The Constitutional Court, in accordance with regular procedural motions and regardless of the state of war, will evaluate the constitutionality and legality of these provisions. This is why they gave to the government of Montenegro 15 days as a deadline for response. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, discussed today with Moscow, with Igor Ivanov, the policy regarding Yugoslavia. They stressed their orientation towards a peaceful resolution. In this respect, Moscow is constantly in touch with Western countries, including Washington. The special envoy of President Yeltsin for Yugoslavia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, after a meeting with the presidents of Georgia, Azerbaijan, came back to Moscow. He expressed also their opinion that the most important thing in this moment is to stop the NATO bombardment, to have coordinated action regarding political resolution of the problem, and strengthen the struggle against separatists. The head of the Russian diplomacy, Igor Ivanov, stressed once again that it's necessary to stop the tragedy that leads nowhere. Ivanov especially spoke about the political activities of Russia that are undertaken now prior to the visit of the UN Secretary General to Moscow. Ivanov emphasizes that prior to Kofi Annan's visit, there should be a certain political progress in order to ensure further progress of these initiatives together with the UN. As they say in the official announcement of the Russian Foreign Ministry, the military action against sovereign Yugoslavia has inflicted serious damage to the world organization and the mechanisms of collective security in Europe. The bombing of a sovereign state such as Yugoslavia is the most blatant violation of the UN Charter and all of the most crucial international laws. President Yeltsin, as this announcement says, passed a decision on non-participation of Russia in all the activities surrounding the NATO anniversary summit. Russia considers its decision on severing its ties with NATO justified, but it continues to be willing to seek, together with NATO members, a peaceful solution of the Yugoslav crisis. This was stressed by the announcement. The president of the Russian State Duma, Gennady Seleznyov, however, says that all of the initiatives and actions of Russia regarding the regulation of the crisis are insufficient, and the entire policy of Kremlin towards Yugoslavia and the behavior of West is simply too soft. While Russia is making promises, more people are dying, more civilian facilities are destroyed, and Moscow claims every day that they're against it. He says that nobody in the world will believe the threats from Moscow anymore soon. The first man of the most important political party in Russia, the leader of the communists, Gennady Zhuganov, stated that Yugoslavia must receive military and humanitarian assistance. Zhuganov is in Nicosia, Cyprus, at the Congress of the Communist International dedicated to Kosovo. The president of the Russian Communists said that the NATO aggression violates all of the agreements made after the Second World War and warned that this could expand to Europe as a whole. In Budapest, it is confirmed that Russia called its ambassador to Hungary back to Moscow for consultations and postponed the visit of the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs to Moscow that had been scheduled for the end of May. The Russian Foreign Affairs Minister explained this by noting the inadmissible behavior of the Hungarian government towards the Russian and Belarusian humanitarian assistance package for Yugoslavia. Russia and several other members of the Commonwealth of Independent States will hold tomorrow joint exercises of their anti-aircraft units. They will be headed by the commander of the Russian aviation, Gennady Kornukov. Units will participate for Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, and Tajikistan. Russia has recently accelerated its military measures because of the tension with the Western countries. The Greek daily Bradini claims that NATO and US have, in the 28 days of aggression, lost 81 soldiers. In a text subtitled "Exclusive," the paper says that these are primarily pilots of planes and helicopter crews downed by anti-aircraft units of Yugoslavia. As Bradini states, this doesn't include the losses among foreign mercenaries who are working in the terrorist KLA and recruited by the creator of the New World Order. The Greek paper also claims that the Western public is not informed in order to avoid the panic and condemnation by the public of the NATO actions. French government had again difficulty in explaining why it happened that a civilian building was bombed last night in Belgrade. They offered several answers to the journalists but couldn't find any approval. One of the journalists said that this building was essentially target on the list number 2, but another one was speaking that this building was essentially part of the plan to break the Serbian machinery. Many journalists insisted that this was a purely civilian target, full of television, radio stations, but the French diplomats had no response to this. They were also forced to admit the power of the Yugoslav army, although many countries, members of NATO, avoid to recognize that. Zhemin Zhibao in China says that if this war expands by military troops in an attempt for an occupation of Kosovo, there will be a very difficult guerrilla war. This is going to cause further confusion in the Balkans and a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. The aggressor has another option right now, to accept the call of the freedom-loving countries of the world to stop this bombing and go back to political dialogue. Under the pretext of protection of human rights and prevention of humanitarian catastrophe, what we see is the dominance of the U.S. They brutally mix themselves up in internal affairs of a country, causing aggression that has led to huge humanitarian catastrophe. The key of NATO's expansion to the east is precisely the Balkans, a place where East and West meet. America is using the separatism of the Albanian terrorists. The communist parties of Bulgaria, Greece, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Albania condemned in a joint declaration NATO aggression, asking for immediate stopping in the bombing. The aggression of NATO threatens to engulf the entire Balkans. The people of the Balkans do not need foreign tutors to resolve their problems. The people of the Balkans are called to prevent this murderous all-out war, which is the goal of the aggression. 8 recipients of Nobel Prize made a joint appeal today in Rome to stop the bombing of Yugoslavia and go back to a political dialogue, the only road out of this more and more dramatic crisis. On the occasion of the 2,750 years from the birth of Rome, the capital city of Italy is hosting the first World Summit of Nobel Prize laureates. Among the attendees, former Soviet President Gorbachev, the leader of Northern Ireland, David Tremble, the former President of South Africa, William de Klerk, the physicist Joseph Rothblatt, former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Betty Williams from Northern Ireland, Rigoberta Menchu from Guatemala, and the Italian Rita Levi-Montalcini. During the reception with the mayor of Rome, Francesco Rutelli, the former Soviet president and Nobel Prize laureate Mikhail Gorbachev stressed that the war is a mistake. War has never resolved a single problem. That's why we should immediately go back to reason and compromise, which requires a lot of measures in order to stabilize the situation in the Balkans. In the hall of Julius Caesar, where the meeting was held, there were many other diplomatic representatives, Italian officials, and politicians. Members of the new communists wore white T-shirts with targets in protest against the bombing of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. In front of the Campidoglio Palace, which is the office of the mayor of Rome, there were many anti-war protesters saying, "Stop the bombs, NATO out of Italy." Washington Post states that Clinton is so obsessed with Kosovo that he clearly neglects other internal affairs, leading to an increasing dissatisfaction of the public. Clinton is within a crisis that brings a lot of unknown quantities with it. Everything that's less than a victory, as victory is defined in Washington, can be disastrous for Clinton and bring a lot of catastrophic political consequences. Clinton's statements, in which he tries to conceal the real reasons of the aggression, are being carefully watched. Thus, Charles Jones of the University of Wisconsin states in Washington Post that Clinton makes great efforts to find more and more reasons for this intervention in order to justify the involvement in the crisis that nobody controls and that is being quite suspected in the American public. Commentators of Reuters claim that NATO is not waging a war in order to save the Albanians or help the resolution of the Kosovo crisis, but simply to provide survival for themselves. They show that there is a lot of dissent within NATO. For example, the head of the French diplomacy opposed the escalation from the second towards the third phase of the aggression, which would lead to an ever greater bombardment of a wide array of targets. At the same time, Mr. Vedrin admits that NATO did not reach the expected results. In NATO, there is also a disagreement regarding the possible ground troops or economic sanctions against Yugoslavia. Unlike U.S. hawks, Europeans do not agree with this kind of escalation. The exception is the British Prime Minister. According to some diplomatic sources, it is not exclusive that there should be another European bloc that would be against this aggression and returning the resolution of Kosovo crisis onto a political track. Many Europeans are no longer happy about what is happening in Yugoslavia. New York Times publishes today a text by the former Defense Secretary Secretary under Kennedy and Johnson, Robert McNamara, who marks that Clinton, prior to further involvement in a Balkan quagmire, should recall Vietnam so that this tragic episode of the American history is not repeated in the heart of Europe. McNamara speaks about the fear that a Balkan conflict would really catch both parties in an escalation similar to the one in the Vietnam. The London paper Guardian says that this is essentially an American and British war against Serbia. Clinton and Blair are behaving just as if they were in an election campaign. This aggression on Yugoslavia cannot be reduced to manipulation of the public. The sooner Clinton and Blair understand that, tragic consequences will be lesser. The Daily Telegraph says that the main word in this aggression is with officials close to Blair, such as the Secretary Suarez, his press advisor Campbell, and his Chief of Staff Powell. British Times reports once again on a great division within the Labour Party due to the war in Yugoslavia. As they say, this war will take a lot of time of healing. Most Labour Party members opposed the war, which was expressed during the last parliamentary session in Kosovo, where they really criticized the head of diplomacy Robin Cook and the Defense Secretary Robertson. Times also reports that the parliamentary member Alice Mann will be chastised because of her secret trip to Yugoslavia without a prior permission. The party leaders were astonished by the statements of Mrs. Mann after her trip, during her presentation at the parliament and in front of journalists to whom she spoke about the innocent civilian victims of NATO. In one of the texts on this war in Europe, as Guardian calls the NATO aggression, the main topic is the partnership between the KLA terrorists and NATO. Guardian says that up until a month ago, KLA was considered a terrorist group, connected with drug smuggling and threats to Albanians who did not share their militancy. The terrorists are now using satellite phones to give NATO data about the situation on the ground. This is a real irony, given the earlier statements of NATO that they do not want to be an air force of KLA. Guardian also says that humanitarian workers have seen how terrorists from KLA are confiscating the properties of Albanians living in Kosovo. Experts from the IMF are estimating that this aggression against Yugoslavia will damage the economy of many neighboring countries, including Southeastern Europe as a whole. They say that the Yugoslav neighbors will face crises in their internal trade, in terms of infrastructure and tourism. As they also add, the smallest countries will suffer the most. In the little town, Littleton in Colorado, two 18-year-old boys killed 25 high school students. In a building of the school, this massacre, one more expression of the serious decadence of the U.S. society, happened when two 18-year-old kids armed with guns, bombs and explosives entered the school and opened fire on their friends. This mad shooting lasted for about half an hour. This is a country of violence, noted the journalist of CBS, Ed Bradley, giving a diagnosis of the sick U.S. society. He was shocked by what is essentially a normal product of the American society, where violence is part of life, of the philosophy and the education of the youth. The cynical criminal Clinton, who for days and weeks says to those same young people throughout America that it is good and just that he kills people with bombs, now says to the same youth that they should be helped how to resolve conflicts with words and not with arms. A sad and tragic example for the American youth, with this president and leadership that solve problems by force and kill whenever somebody opposes them. They grow up in an atmosphere in which militarism is part of culture and application of force, normal method of conflict resolution. The law of the Wild West obviously hasn't stopped functioning in America. This is confirmed by massacres like this, but also the statistics about the increase of all kinds of crime in America, the dramatic rise of drug abuse and prisoners. Especially shocking is the growing number of suicides among young people. In the Larry King live show, it was said that American society has grown in violence. America reaps what it sowed. The loss of values, ideals, ethics in a society obsessed with money has simply erased socializing and communication. This society, as the criminal Clinton and his cliques say, is what they want to impose to the rest of the world as a model. They say that one reason why they want to conquer Yugoslavia and put the Balkans under their control is to spread their American values. Obviously, this is not going to go with us.
Coming up next, Defense Secretary William Cohen and Joint Chiefs of